All right, welcome sixth graders. Today is currently March 25th, 2020. It's about 1:30 in the afternoon. Figured it'd be as good a time as any to shoot a Trivium video, and this is gonna be your first day of Trivium content. So before you get started here, I want you to remember we are doing a three-step approach to all of your classes, right? So before you got here, you should have been at step one, which was doing your warm-up. Okay, now whether you're on paper or not, you do have a paper copy, but I recommend that if you have access to it, go to the Google page and submit it electronically. Okay, so if you haven't done that, pause the video, do that, and then come back. Okay, now our topic today is going to be continuing on fallacies. And your warm-up asks you to think about what exactly are fallacies, because it is something we covered and then school shut down right after, which unfortunately for us, that's going to be one of the focal points or the main things we're going to focus on in our studies. Okay, so I want you to remember this right now. Fallacies are bad logic, bad uses of someone's logic. Okay, so when we do these, we'll probably do at least one a week, maybe two. We're going to be doing two fallacies each time. Okay, so just because we're doing two fallacies, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're only going to be doing two flashcards, but you will be doing flashcards for them. Now, I'm going to let you know how many you're going to do to start off, just to let you know. Okay, but before we do that, I just want to give you a couple of ideas on how to organize these, because over time, you are going to have to be keeping these in order, because you are going to be having a test at some point on all these note cards that we make. Okay, so your note cards, these should be coming home with your packages that you're getting. Today, I'm going to ask that you do 3 of them. All right, these are just your typical 3x5 normal ones. And what we're going to do is we're going to be writing on the front blank side. That's where you're going to write your fallacy or your term, right? We did that before you left. Fallacy or term on the front side. And then on the back with the lines is going to be your definition, right? Because that's going to be longer, so you can keep it better organized on the line side, okay? I'll do my best to remind you, but once again, I don't want this video to drone on forever and ever and ever, okay? So it's something you need to remember yourself. Next, a couple ways to keep it organized. One, traditional old rubber band. Great thing to use, super cheap, pretty easy to find for the most part. Okay, so if you've got a rubber band, I recommend that you use that. That works out great. Now, if you have a hole punch and you're lucky enough to have one of these binding rings, these work out great too, right? You hole punch, let's say like in the corner here on all of them, like in one specific corner, you can slip the ring through and then you can keep it all in one spot. So that's another good thing too. And then lastly is going to be a binding clip, which I need to go grab really quickly. Should look like this, okay? And you can open it, put your cards in, clamp it, put it down, keeps them all in one spot. Those are 3 options for you, okay? So we're gonna get started on your fallacy notes. Now, remember, if you feel like you're being rushed, one of the great things of the few of not being in 406 in my classroom is that you can pause this video at any time, right? So I'm gonna move relatively fast here. If you feel overwhelmed, hit that pause button, stop, get the notes you need, and then move on, okay? All right, let's give her a shot. Okay, so I'm going to minimize my face now. And we are gonna move up here. And we're gonna get started with the very first slide. Now, the first slide is asking you, what is relevance? Now, relevance is important because these fallacies we're gonna start with, has to do with things being not relevant. So I'll give you an example of something that is not relevant or irrelevant. If I ask myself, I want to know if my students understand what Alexander the Great accomplished during his lifetime. So I ask students, what did Alexander get crowned pharaoh of without even having to fight there in that kingdom? And the answer, some of you I know are screaming, Egypt, Egypt. I call on Johnny Grooch. And Johnny Grooch answers, instead of Egypt, Mr. Plog, what is your favorite color? Now, of course, anyone who knows me well is that I have two favorite colors. It's green and gold. But that is completely irrelevant to the situation at hand. Okay? So these fallacies that we're going to go through today, they're going to be called irrelevant fallacies or fallacies of relevance. Okay. So you're going to need three things today. You're going to need a pencil, you're going to need index cards, and you're going to need a worksheet. Now, the worksheet came home in your packets, and you also should have seen it when you opened up this page if you're online, okay? But I do want to take a look just so that we can see it in the hope that people understand exactly what's going to be expected of them. So just sit tight for 1 second here. Okay. Perfect. Here it is. All right. So the worksheet's going to look like this. Okay. Now, normally we would fill this in together, but with our new way of learning, the definition will be filled out for you. When we're done, you're going to need to make an example of the fallacy in your own words, and then you're going to have to draw a cartoon that's based off of the example that you make. Okay, so that's what it's talking about by worksheet. All right, let's get back into it. Okay, so an ad fontem argument, that's going to be a subcategory or a small category of the two fallacies we're going to do today and our next two. Okay, now that's Latin, right? It's Latin in the sense that it means ad fontem means a fountain. Now, we're not saying that these fallacies are about water fountains, okay? But fountains were important to the ancient Romans because that was their source of water, okay? So when we're talking about ad fontem fallacies or bad logic, we're talking about someone who attacks the source of the argument rather than trying to answer it itself, okay? And we'll talk about that in a second. Now, this is where you should do your first flashcard, right? You should be doing the ad fontem arguments on the front side, and then on the back, you should be doing these arguments focus on the source of the argument rather than the issue itself. So we've got the front side here, look at my cursor, and then the back side here. I'm gonna move on. Remember, feel free to pause it and finish that flashcard yourself. Ad hominem. The two fallacies we're gonna talk about today are gonna be called ad hominem blank or ad hominem blank. Now, the word homonym comes from the word homo sapien. Any biology people or any science people might know what that is. A homo sapien is another name for, it's the scientific word for a human being. So we are attacking the person itself. Now, the literal translation is to the man, because remember, I apologize, ladies, but at the time, humans were considered what was called mankind, correct? So when you see the translation, that's what it says, but it really means humans. I apologize, my dog is getting a little agitated right now, so I'm watching her. I don't want her to bark. Okay, so your first fallacy. Now, it says to write a definition in your own words. You don't need to do that, okay? What you need to do is, this is your next flashcard. So on your second one now, you should be writing ad hominem abusive on the front, and then this definition here on the back side. Remember, you can pause it and do it at your own pace. Now, this is an example of somebody committing an ad hominem abusive fallacy right here. Now, we'll talk about this one in a second, but it sounds very difficult to understand, but it really isn't when I give you an example that I hear in the hallway just about every day. So, two students are getting into an argument, let's say, and they're arguing over who has the better French fries, Burger King or McDonald's. Now, anybody who knows me well knows that I probably have a strong preference one way or another, but I'd always be up for a debate. So I would pick Burger King fries, and I would start by talking about how well they're cooked and that they're not ever soggy and that they have the right amount of salt. Now, if somebody wanted to combat me with something about McDonald's fries, they could tell me that they prefer saltier French fries, or the fact that maybe they like the fact that they're smaller and more comes in an order. But when somebody commits an ad hominem abusive fallacy, they're just going to completely 100% insult that person. So I would say, I just believe McDonald's French fries are too salty. And then Johnny Grooch would look at me and say, oh yeah, Mr. Pog, well, guess what? Your face is too salty, right? They're attacking me rather than giving a reason as to why their argument is better. So we look at this picture here and we see it, right? We have a lobster versus a shrimp, and it looks like they're running for student council. And the lobster looks down and is giving a speech in a debate saying, can we let a shrimp like this run our great country? Now, obviously it's referring to his height, right? And he's not bringing up any reason why he should be in charge. He's just belittling or insulting the person that he's going against. Unfortunately, this happens in politics today way too much. And right here, the good old example of your face, or I hate to say it, sixth graders, but sometimes I hear the your mom argument come up in the hallway too. That's the exact same kind of thing, okay? Ad hominem abusive fallacy. You're having an argument, and rather than address it, you just insult the other person. Usually it's because the other person doesn't really have anything to say on the matter that's worth it. Now, this is a very difficult fallacy to understand compared to the other one, but it is our last flashcard. So on the front side, take a look at the bottom. You should be writing an ad hominem circumstantial on the front side, okay? And on the back side, you should be writing argument that discredits or ignores a person because they can gain something if they win. Now, this will be your last flashcard of the day, right? So do it at your own pace. Feel free to pause the video. I am going to move on. So have you ever been in this situation before? Someone doesn't trust your opinion because you're a member of a group that would benefit if you won the argument. An example I can think of personally is when students talk about school uniforms, right? They come up to me and they might have a great opinion as to why school uniforms don't have the ability for students to express themselves, or it makes students look like they're not individuals, or that unfortunately people have to go out and buy clothes. They come up with all these fantastic arguments, but maybe either I'm having a bad day or I decide, hey, you know what? You're going to be the one that's going to end up getting what you want if you win. So you're probably doing this just to win an argument, when in reality, you might not be doing that. Okay? Now, I could think of another example. Right before we got out of school, there were a whole bunch of students that were talking about they had reasons why we shouldn't be in school with this new epidemic that's starting, right? And I thought it was an interesting argument, but I would say that I didn't really take it too seriously because I figured, hey, there's probably a whole bunch of students that just want to get out of school, right? But in light of recent events, you could argue that I committed an ad hominem circumstantial fallacy. Now, this is one that I usually do in class, but we would have a student come up to Mr. Gruch or me, and they would tell me that, or Mr. Gruch, that they don't believe we should have school uniforms. And rather than listen, we would just shrug that person off. Okay? That's us technically attacking the source of the argument because we're not listening and we're seeing that the person themselves stands something to gain, right? Now, is it as mean as an abusive fallacy? Probably not. But is it still a personal attack? Yes, because it has to do with the person, not the argument. Okay? Now, the nice thing is that for tomorrow, all you're going to need to finish is that worksheet. Okay? So if we go back to that really quickly, if we go back to this really quickly, you're going to be doing an example and a cartoon based off of both of these arguments or fallacies. So the first one you're going to do is ad hominem abusive, right? That's going to be talking about insulting someone rather than addressing the argument that they had. I gave you the example of McDonald's versus Burger King French fries and somebody calling my face salty, right? They did not give me a reason as to why they believe what they did. Circumstantial, it's still an attack against the person or the man, right? But it's because whoever is going to win the argument stands to gain something from it. Students thinking that we shouldn't have school uniforms. People thinking that we should get off of work or school because of the new disease epidemic that's out. It could be students arguing to parents, sorry parents, that they need a later bedtime. And rather than listen as to why, parents would say, well, yeah, because you want to stay up late and watch TV or play video games, right? It's all of those sorts of ideas. Now, I'm not saying that your parents don't have a right to tell you what your bedtime is, so don't start with that. But what I'm saying is there's a lot of times where people will completely ignore someone simply because they know that if they win the argument, they will get something out of it. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all I have for you today. Once again, I would just like to remind you to be safe and please do your best to keep up with what we are doing in homework. You should be able to submit this online if you have the ability to do so. Otherwise, doing this worksheet on paper and getting your example and your cartoon done for both sides, there are two sides, is your homework for tomorrow. All right, we're gonna have a debate tomorrow. It's gonna be about would you rather do something or something else. You'll figure out what that is. But your exit ticket should come after that, and you are going to have to give me an example of what a student might use for an ad hominem circumstantial fallacy. All right, have a good night, everybody.